Okay, good morning, everybody. Uh, Today's topic, Kedushas Beis Knesses, uh, is very topical because the halachos involved apply to us uh, today more than ever, I think.
Right.
Uh, the Gemara refers to a shul as a mikdash ma'at, uh, a miniature temple, if you will. Uh, Now, to what extent it's really comparable to the mikdash? Uh, does it have the same level of kedusha? Uh, to a certain extent, we're going to explore that. Uh, the basic questions are: number one, if a shul has a status of a mikdash ma'at, if there's a certain kedusha attached to a shul, what activities may or may not take place in a shul? What type of building can be made into a shul based on its previous use? For example, if a church became available, can you buy it and make it convert it into a shul, and vice versa? Can you sell a shul uh, to a church? And these are all questions that relate to kedushas beis knesses. And more recently, we had a serious issue, if you recall, a number of years ago, when the residents of Gush Katif in Gaza were forced to leave. So, first of all, they had to dig up all the graves in the cemetery to take them with them. That's number one. But what do you do with the shuls? You have a lot of shuls in Gush Katif, Nitzarim, other places. Uh, do you have to destroy the shuls and tear them down? Or does the Kedusha of the shul remain, and whatever happens to it, but you can't be the one or the instrument of taking it down? These are questions that were asked at the time. Uh, I should mention, just parenthetically, that the psak at that time was that you may not destroy the shuls. Take out the Sifrei Torah and all the things that are holy there, but you can't destroy the shul. And as soon as the Arabs came in, they take care of it and they destroyed it. But the shul itself has a certain kedusha that we can't deal with. Uh, Also, if you had a shul that was destroyed by the Nazis, does it still retain its kedusha? Can that building be used for a train station or something like that? And these are questions that came up. Uh, the Mishnah says that you can't sell an item of lower kedusha in order to purchase something of a higher level kedusha. I mean, you may sell, rather. You can go up, malim b'kodesh, but not vice versa. So a shul has kedusha, and therefore you can't use it for something that has less kedusha. Uh, the Ramban teaches us that the shul is what they call a tashmish shel kedusha. It's an item of holiness, and it is once it's designated for the mitzvah of tefillah, then it, even though it's no longer in use, its special status still remains. However, once it's no longer used, it can be sold like any other tashmish kedusha. You could sell a talus, you can sell a pair of tefillin, so it can be sold. The question is to what purpose. It shouldn't be sold to something that is used for inappropriate usage. The Ramban is the one who says that at a tashmish kedusha, a shul could be sold. The Ran disagrees and says that once the kedusha is there, it remains permanent. So you have a lot of difference among the Rishonim as to the status of a shul once it's no longer used as a shul. The Sefer Yereim says that it's actually a biblical commandment. You have a pasuk that says "Umikdashi tira'u." You have to have reverence for my holy place. Now, that refers to the tabernacle, that refers to the Mishkan, that refers to the Beis HaMikdash. But since a shul is a Mikdash Ma'at, so the Sefer Yereim, that's Rabbi of Metz in the 12th century, one of the early Rishonim, he says that it applies to shuls, and that's why you have to have respect for a shul and treat it with Kedusha. Now, the Sifri goes one step further, and it states there that you can't take the stones of the Heichal or the Beis Hamikdash and use it for anything else. Once an item has kedusha, then it cannot be used for something else, and that refers to the shul as well. So you can't obviously take the boards of a shul or the bricks from a shul and use it to build a barbecue pit, for example. Okay.
Wally,
Yes.
at what point does the shul get the kedusha? As I'm building a new shul from scratch. So at what point does the kedusha now is there?
When
is
the
this
shul,
by building it, or you have that?
I would think that the kedusha begins once the building is completed, because it can't be used for anything until it's finished. So once the shul is completed, then it has the status of a mikdash ma'at, and therefore the kedusha is part
Let
of
me
it.
ask you something. I remember Rabbi Yudin spoke about this years and years ago. I have everything built. I don't have this. I don't have the Siddurim in. I don't have the Sifrei Torah in. They're not there yet. And the kids want to have a hockey game in this room.
Okay,
right?
I'm gonna come to that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, no, I'll mention it now, as long as you bring it up. When you know, okay, many poskim, including Rav Shechter, hold that Kedushas Pesach Nesses is Doraisa, which raises the bar a little bit in terms of its status. Technically speaking, a shul can only be used for two purposes: for davening and for learning. That's it. However, the halacha tells us, and this is what Rabbi Yudin did and what all other rabbis do, when you build a shul, you build it with a tanai, with a condition that it could be used for other appropriate, the key word is appropriate purposes. So, for example, you're allowed to have a kiddush in shul, a shalashudis. You're allowed to have a bris in shul. These are not davening functions. You could have a lecture of some sort. You could have a meeting. You could have a shul dinner in a shul. In other words, if it's built with that condition, with that tanai, and every rabbi who's involved in building a shul stipulates that the shul is primarily used for davening and learning, but it can also be used for other appropriate activities. And the key word is appropriate. So a hockey game, unless there's a gym attached to the shul, would not be the appropriate use. My question that I've always raised, how do shuls allow bingo games in many shuls as a fundraiser? It's an interesting question. Again, you're raising money for the shul. All right, maybe. You can have weddings and bar mitzvahs in shuls, but there shouldn't be mixed dancing, for example. You shouldn't have perhaps New Year's Eve parties in a shul. These are things, and you have to determine what's considered appropriate activity for a shul. But almost every shul, as far as I know, when it's built with that tanai, with that condition that it can be used for other appropriate activities. And again, the key word is appropriate. And a shul retains its kedusha even if it's destroyed. For example, if there are ruins of a shul, according to the Mishnah, you can't hang your laundry to dry in that shul, or spread nets or dry fruits on the roof. The kedusha remains. The kedusha remains.
Rabbi,
yes.
Is there a list of what the rabbis refer to, quote, as appropriate uses of a shul?
No. There's no list per se. Every rabbi has to make that determination. When the shul is built, it's built on with a condition that is clearly stipulated that it can be used for purposes other than davening and learning that are appropriate for a shul. Now, how far you want to stretch the word appropriate? I mean, we know shuls have some shuls have dances, some shuls have New Year's Eve parties, some shuls have weddings and bar mitzvahs where there's mixed dancing.
Wally,
It depends on the rabbi and how strict he is in determining what's appropriate for the shul. Yes, Nathan.
Wally,
Yeah.
is the downstairs social hall considered part of the shul?
Yes.
So
It's
does it
all one
have?
building. It's all one building. It's one kedusha. It's all part of the shul. Again, there are some shuls that have a gym attached to it. There are some shuls that have swimming pools in it. And so that if it's part of the shul, and but again, if you have a swimming pool, should there be separate hours for men and women? Obviously, if you're not going to have mixed dancing, you're not going to have mixed swimming either. Again, it's a very, I wouldn't say flexible, but you have to be very clear. And so there are some rabbis that are more strict than others. For example, I was married in Englewood in Rabbi Swift's shul, and at the time I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was. For every wedding that takes place in his shul, he insists on meeting the chosim to make sure that it's going to be a proper wedding. And I'll go you one step further. At our wedding, no photographers were allowed in the shul, in the sanctuary. You have photographers during the dinner. You have photographers outside, but in the sanctuary itself, because again, we've all been to weddings and we see the photographers running around and under the chuppah, in and around, quote unquote, what's appropriate. And a shul, if it's a wedding, it's a davar shebekdusha, and it should be done appropriately without photographers running around and getting in the way. Now, again, unfortunately, my wedding album doesn't have any pictures under the chuppah. The photographer stood in the back of the shul, and whatever they can get in their long-distance lenses, they got. But they weren't allowed in the shul per se, because that was his standard for what's appropriate in the shul. So every rabbi has to make that determination. Rav Avadia Yosef was asked a question regarding a synagogue in Austria that had been destroyed by the Nazis, and it couldn't be fixed. And they were going to rent it to become a train station. And the chief rabbi of Vienna asked Rabbi Yosef if renting the destroyed synagogue is a violation of this Mishnah that the shul has a permanent kedusha, even after its destruction. And again, given the fact that it can never be used again for a shul, so Rav Avadia tried to find several ways to be lenient. The Machlokas, the Ramban, and the Ran, in terms of how the Kedusha Beis HaKnesset is a function of serving as a Tashmish Shel Mitzvah, and it's not being used for that purpose anymore. Maybe it doesn't have that Kedusha anymore. Anyhow, he allowed it after a whole bunch of heterim that he tried to squeeze out. But it's a serious question. And one of the heterim was based on the fact that, if you remember in the Hanukkah story, when the Chashmonaim retook the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash had been desecrated by the Syrian Greeks, so they couldn't use the stones of the Mizbeach, but they didn't know what to do with it. So all the stones of the Mizbeach were put away and stored someplace, that someplace in the future, Mashiach will come and say whether these stones still had their Kedusha, even if they were desecrated. But they manually disassembled the Beis HaMikdash to rededicate it and rebuild anew. So that's, again, has to do with the machlokas of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I know you've talked about this before. Does the Kedushat Beis HaKnesset, you're referring to appropriate behavior or activities. Does any rabbi ever address that in terms of the Kahal's behavior and actions?
Yes.
During davening, and coffee, and standing and talking.
100%. 100%. That I would assume is self-understood. It's that. Halavai is right. In shul, it's, especially when you're in the actual, it's one thing when you're having a kiddush in the other room and you're schmoozing and talking about topics that may not always be appropriate. But certainly in the shul itself, where davening is taking place, it's definitely inappropriate to be talking about sports or politics or other types of things. And clearly, there are some shuls where rabbis are very, very makpid. I was davening Rabbi Emanuel Feldman in Atlanta, big shul. I was there once for a Shabbos, and you could hear a pin drop. Because he was very, and everybody knew it, and he was famous for his famous quote that little children like orders should be carried out. That was, and the kids were not running up and down the aisles. There was no, it was a proper davening, and he's not a yeki, but that's the way davening should be. That should be okay. There are discussions about the difference between a Beis Hamikdash and a Beis HaKnesset, but basically the kedusha exists even when the temple is no longer used, except in certain circumstances, like the case by Avadia Yosef's Psak. In Gush Katif, they were told to leave the shuls, not to destroy them, and unfortunately, the Arabs took care of that. It's also interesting. There's a fascinating machlokas between in the 18th century between two gedolim regarding the following question. In many communities, we do it also when we have old Sfarim or old Sifrei Torah. You bury them, and you bury them in very often with a person at his funeral. Apparently, in some European communities in the 18th century, non-Jews would raid the cemetery and take the Kisvei Kodesh and use them for all types of purposes because parchment and paper was expensive. So the question was, what should we do? Should we burn the Sfarim, or should we continue to bury them? So clearly you can't burn the Sfarim, but the question was not resolved because you wanted to treat the Sfarim with dignity, but burning them would not be dignified, and they just simply had to be very careful where they buried the Sfarim, or maybe have a shomer at the cemetery. In Gush Katif, there's nothing you can do about it. That you cleared out, they disinterred the bodies from the cemetery when they left, but the shuls will remain standing for a short period of time. And once the Arabs came in, they didn't. That was the first thing they did, was to destroy the shuls. The Gemara tells us that in Bavel, and this is the source for our Tanai, all shuls were built on Tanai that they could be used for other purposes. But again, the Gemara clearly states that even with the Tanai, going back to the question that was raised before, you may not act with quote unquote frivolity in shul. I'm not sure how do you define frivolity, but clearly it shouldn't be used for mundane activities, but things that relate to inyanei halacha, marriages, and siyumim, and smachos, things of that sort. Again, my question remains about bingo. I don't know how that was ever allowed in any shul, because that's claiming gambling, and the atmosphere during a bingo game is not appropriate for a shul. Okay. There's the Achronim, the Torah Tamima and the Aruch HaShulchan talk about people discussing mundane matters in shul before davening starts or after davening is over. And again, if it's a pressing need, perhaps, if there's a bill in the legislature that affects the shul, and you want to get votes for it, perhaps. If there's a local zoning variance that has to be discussed, perhaps. But again, not during davening, only after. Clearly, most contemporary poskim are very clear that smoking, when people did smoke more often, is clearly prohibited in shul. And I remember very clearly that there were some people who were hooked and addicted to cigarettes. As soon as Havdalah was made, they had cigarettes stashed in their talus bag. Out it came, and they lit up the cigarette, which was clearly inappropriate.
Wally, that
Yes,
was Rabbi Manny Fulda.
yes, all the time, the cigarette. But I don't know. I was never in shul, Rabbi Fulda, so I don't know what he did on Motzei Shabbos. I couldn't do it. But I know people in shul, and they had it in their talus bag. And as soon as the Shabbos was over, boom, they lit up. Now, going back to what I said before, a fascinating issue, we talked about the Tanai, the condition that you make when you build a shul, that it can be used for other quote unquote appropriate activities. This became very, very important when the Hasidic Rebbeim, many, if not most, of the Hasidic Rebbeim have a shtibel in their home. So their home, the basement of their home is the shtibel. That's what people do. I'm not talking about big shuls like Chabad or Satmar, but what they call the Rebelach, little Rebbes here and there. I davened in a shtibel like that in the Bronx. Or Moshe Bik, great Talmud Chacham, and it was a small shul, not very big, and upstairs is where he lived. So, but the question is, Hasidic Rebbeim have people come to them all the time with questions, and they have farbrengen, they have different gatherings, and again, when a shtibel or when a rebbe decides to have a shul in his house, he has to have it al tanai that all of these issues can take place, assuming it's appropriate. You have, I mean, if you go to the Satmar Rebbe or Lubavitcher Rebbe, people go there to get engaged. And there are many, many different rooms. And you can go from one simcha to the next, and one l'chaim to the next, because it was set up for that purpose. But clearly, the question is, what type of behavior is considered appropriate? What types of conversation are appropriate? What types of dress are appropriate to have, even with that Tanai? Rav Moshe Feinstein does a long tshuva talking about, shalashudas and shul and kiddush within the topic of kedushas beis hakneses, and he came to a ruling that you're allowed to bring a seeing eye dog into shul if that's the only way that a person could get around. If a person was blind, and is bringing a dog into shul appropriate? Fascinating question. And again, it's a mitzvah purpose, and it's a question, it's a machlokas Rashi and Arzarua in terms of what's considered normative, what's considered appropriate in the shul. And even though he may have been reluctant to follow Rashi's pshat, but a person who's visually impaired could bring a seeing eye dog into shul, following the opinion of Rashi, that according to other Rishonim, certain activities in shul would not be. For example, eating in shul. You're not allowed to eat in shul per se. It's inappropriate. Which is why my personal opinion, and whoever could raise it with the shul board if they want, when you make kiddush in shul for everybody, before the rabbi usually stands on the bima and makes kiddush. That's inappropriate, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. I've been to shuls, for example, a number of shuls that I've been to in Silver Spring, and in other places I've been to, where the rabbi goes down to the room where kiddush is, and everybody stands around. They don't grab, and they wait, which is something that is hard in Fairlawn to do that. But they wait for the rabbi to come in from shul into the place where the kiddush is being held, and he makes kiddush there, because you can't eat in shul. So making kiddush from the bima is at best questionable, and in my humble opinion, it should not take place. They should make kiddush there. But unfortunately, we have to train the people in shul not to chop and grab everything once those doors open up. But again, it's an educational process, and there's nothing wrong with teaching the people the halacha about kedushas beis hakneses, what's appropriate in a shul, what's not appropriate, and they'll wait 2 minutes for the rabbi to get off the bima and go and make kiddush in shul. That would be appropriate. But in any event, yes.
You bring up everything that, it's appropriate behavior in addition to learning or davening. Other activities have to be appropriate and all that. So how do the people, like on Purim, if they have a Purim suit at shul, and some people take an extreme with their drinking, talk about inappropriate behavior, how do they get around that?
There's no way to get around it. I mean, if it's wrong, it's wrong. Many shuls have done away with hard liquor because of that. Many shuls have done away with kiddush clubs. I can tell you that in the early years of Shomrei Torah, and this is nothing to be proud of, until it was stopped. For many years, every year, a bunch of guys would get together to get one poor fellow drunk. That was their shtick. Every year they pick a different person and they would ply him with whiskey and get until eventually it was stopped because it was getting out of hand. It's horrible. There are kiddush clubs where people drink before mincha on Friday. They drink on Shabbos morning during haftir. It's wrong. There's no way to justify that. And as I said, kiddush clubs have been abolished in many shuls, and many shuls do not serve hard liquor. They'll serve grape juice, maybe wine, but grape juice, and because this, it all goes back to the simple fact, and I've said this many times, and I'll repeat it again. There are basic halachos that people have to learn. And just because people do something, it doesn't always mean it's the proper thing to do. And if people, and again, unfortunately, the rabbis are beholden to the board of trustees of the shul, who are often the worst violators of some of these issues. And, they're worried about their job. Unless a rabbi has a lifetime contract, but not every rabbi is fortunate enough to have, you have to be careful not to offend people, and even the people who are doing the wrong things. There's a very classic story, I'm sure you've heard it, about the new rabbi who's hired. He comes to town and he gives his first drasha. And the first drasha is about the importance of keeping Shabbos. So after the drasha, the president takes him aside and says, "Rabbi, our people don't all keep Shabbos. Not a good topic." Okay. The next Shabbos, he talks about kashrus. And the president takes him aside and says, "Rabbi, our people are in business. They go out to eat. Not a good topic." So the next Shabbos, he says, "All right, taras mishpacha, the importance of mikveh." Oh, the president was apoplectic. He didn't know what to tell her. Mikveh in this day and age? Come on, Rabbi. So Rabbi says, "So what should I talk about?" "I don't know. Talk about something Jewish." It's an old joke, but the rabbis have to sometimes be very, very careful about what they say, because your livelihood depends on the people who you're saying it to. I'm reminded, and this happened to me actually, when I was in the short period of time when I was in the Rabbanus. It was a very large shul, and in the front row, among the people who were sitting there, there was a judge, a well-known judge, who sat in the front row. And I got up to give a drasha one Shabbos, and I had a couple of svarim with me. And the judge said in a very loud stage whisper, "Too many books, poor case." So you have to be conscious of who you're dealing with all the time. And unfortunately, unless a rabbi is very, very strong, it's difficult to do in some cases. If a rabbi is very, very powerful, then he can insist on certain standards. It's all about standards. If a rabbi is strong enough, and again, when you're starting a shul from scratch, you can do certain things. And I remember very clearly when we were in the extension of the rabbi's house across the street, and we're building the new shul where it is now. And I remember that, Milty with us today? Milty Frank, Eddie Gersley, and I sat down with the rabbi, and we begged him to please do something about people talking in shul before we move across the street into the big shul. But it didn't happen. Granted, davening now is much better than it used to be, but even so, in many shuls, people are unaware, or I'm being done the kafschus, they're unaware of the fact that during the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, you're not allowed to talk. During Kriyas Torah, you're not allowed to talk. The whole purpose of repeating the Shemona Esrei is for you to listen to every bracha and answer Amen. Okay, so they're very good about not talking during Kedusha. And Kriyas Torah, they're much, much better about. But people have to be educated. And they should teach a few pages less of Gemara and teach them basic halachas of how to behave in shul, in school. Kids should know that, because these are all day school graduates. Anyway, so
they choose not to follow it.
What's that?
They choose not to follow it. They know what they should and shouldn't do, but then they make their own choice.
Well, as I've said many times before, these are the people that go through the yeshiva, but the yeshiva doesn't go through them.
Absolutely.
And it's unfortunate. But anyway, Kedushas Beis HaKnesses is based on the concept of Mora Mikdash, the same way you had a certain reverence for the Beis HaMikdash.
5 minutes.
Yes, Jay.
Yeah. One personal question. Where are you sitting today?
Yes, I wondered that too.
In my basement, in my office. Why?
Oh. Wow. Kanai Thank you.
This is my man cave.
God bless.
Ari?
Anyway.
Ari?
Yeah.
I am your father's oldest childhood friend.
Wow.
75 years.
Long time.
We've known each other since elementary school.
Wow.
We went to yeshiva together.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have asked me.
Sickle Street.
That's right. 27 and 28.
Right.
Yeah. And then you remember Shimon Newport?
Yes, of course.
So his son is the Chabad rabbi in Fairlawn.
Okay.
And he's been out here a few times. Anyway, enough reminiscing.
Back a long way. And my brother goes back with your uncle Bobby.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so keep in mind, Kedushas Beis HaKnesses is based on Mora Mikdash, and again, according to many, including Rav Hershel Schachter, this is a mitzvah doraisa based on the pasuk Umikdashi Tiro. So it's not a light matter to be pushed aside. It's not just a rabbinic concept, but it could very well be biblical, as many Rishonim and some poskim today hold. So hopefully, going forward, aside from being mindful of it ourselves, perhaps we can remind our seatmates of the same thing too, if they happen to be talking inappropriately or carrying on in a way that's inappropriate. I know that this morning in shul, a lot of people were wearing Knicks hats and Knicks t-shirts because that's all everybody's talking about, the Knicks. But fortunately, nobody talked in shul. They were just wearing the Knicks hat and the Knicks t-shirt. So that was a positive thing. Hopefully they'll do well tonight. Okay. Have a great day, everybody.
Enjoy your